The golden light of the Paris evening streamed through the tall glass windows of Le Ciel Bleu, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The soft hum of violins mingled with the quiet clinking of crystal glasses, and the air smelled faintly of truffle butter and aged wine. Among the chatter and laughter, a group of men in tailored suits occupied the center table, a picture of wealth and arrogance. At the head sat Alexander Duval, a billionaire whose name carried power in every corner of France. His reputation for charm was matched only by his ego. At the far end of the room, Elise Martin, dressed in a crisp white apron, balanced a tray with practiced grace. Her hair was tied in a neat bun, and despite the exhaustion behind her smile, her eyes sparkled with quiet determination. Working here wasn't easy. The clientele were wealthy, demanding, and often cruel in their casual arrogance. But she endured every shift for a reason: her mother's medical bills, her unfinished degree, her dream of teaching French literature one day. When she approached Alexander's table, laughter erupted. One of his companions whispered something in his ear, and Alexander's smile turned mischievous. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine before looking up at her. "Tell me, mademoiselle, do you speak French well enough to serve a king?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. Elise blinked, confused by the question. "I do my best, sir," she said politely. He smirked, clearly amused by her composure. "Then let's make it interesting," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'll give you $5,000 if you can serve me, in perfect French, for the rest of this dinner." His friends chuckled, leaning back to enjoy the show. It wasn't the first time Alexander had turned someone's evening into entertainment. He expected her to blush, stammer, maybe even refuse. But Elise only straightened her posture, her lips curving into a faint, controlled smile. "Very well, monsieur," she replied calmly, switching to flawless French. "Would you like to begin with the house wine, or shall I recommend something worthy of your title?" For a moment, silence fell over the table. The arrogance on Alexander's face faltered, replaced by curiosity. Her accent was perfect, her pronunciation effortless, elegant, melodic, undeniably Parisian. One of his companions tried to joke, "Maybe she rehearsed for you, Alex." But Alexander didn't laugh. He was watching her too closely now, as if seeing her for the first time. Elise moved gracefully, pouring the wine with precision, her voice soft yet commanding as she described each dish in French, its origin, ingredients, and flavors. She spoke like a poet rather than a server, her passion for language seeping into every word. The way she carried herself made the room seem smaller, as if the light itself had chosen to rest on her. When she returned to the table with their appetizers, Alexander tried to throw her off balance. "Tell me," he said in French now, testing her, "do you think serving people like us is the best use of your tongue?" Elise didn't flinch. "Words are meant to express respect, monsieur," she answered, her voice steady. "How they are used depends on who deserves them." The men went quiet. Alexander's smirk faded into something unreadable. He had expected entertainment, not confrontation, but there was no anger in her tone, only dignity. As she walked away, Alexander found himself watching her, feeling an unfamiliar tug in his chest. She had met arrogance with grace, insult with poise, and turned his game into something entirely different. For the first time that night, the billionaire who thought he owned every room felt small. Somewhere between the soft French syllables and the confident way she carried herself, Alexander realized that this waitress was no ordinary woman, and the game he started might just change him forever. The restaurant's hum grew softer as the evening deepened. The chandelier lights glimmered like captured stars, casting golden reflections across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Elise moved between the tables with her usual poise, though her heart still raced from that earlier exchange. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to his ridiculous challenge, but something inside her refused to let a man like Alexander Duval mock her dignity. At his table, the laughter had shifted. What began as amusement was now quiet intrigue. Alexander watched her every move, his sharp blue eyes following her as she refilled glasses and placed plates before each guest. He noticed the way she pronounced every French phrase with careful precision, the way her tone carried warmth instead of submission. There was power in her gentleness, a quiet rebellion that unsettled him. "Tell me, Elise," Alexander said when she returned with their main course, his voice now in French, testing her again. Do you enjoy serving? She met his gaze, unshaken. Serving with respect is an art, monsieur, she replied in fluent French. But so is treating others with it. A few of his companions shifted awkwardly. One coughed into his napkin. The mood at the table had changed. What was once a game now felt like a duel of intellects and pride, and Elise was winning. Alexander leaned forward, intrigued. You speak like a philosopher, not a waitress, he said softly. Where did you learn to talk like that? Elise smiled faintly. From books that cost less than your tie, I imagine. The response drew a startled laugh from one of his friends, quickly stifled when Alexander shot him a look. Yet, instead of taking offense, Alexander's lips curved into something between amusement and admiration. There was wit behind her calm exterior, sharp, intelligent, and unafraid. As she continued her service, their conversation unfolded naturally. Alexander asked about French poetry, and Elise answered with quotes from Victor Hugo and Baudelaire, her words flowing like a melody. When he inquired about wines, she described the history and soul of each region, her passion coloring every sentence. She didn't just serve, she enchanted. And for the first time in a long while, Alexander listened, not out of boredom, not out of habit, but because he genuinely wanted to hear her voice. Between courses, he found himself asking questions that had nothing to do with food. What do you dream of, Elise? Surely this restaurant isn't where you want to stay forever. She hesitated, then said quietly, I'm studying linguistics. I want to teach someday. Language connects people. It bridges worlds that money and power often divide. Her honesty disarmed him. He had met countless women, all drawn to his wealth or status, but none had spoken of dreams that reached beyond luxury. You could easily have taken the 5,000 and walked away, he said, switching back to English. Why didn't you? Elise looked at him steadily. Because your offer wasn't about money, it was about pride. And I don't sell my dignity for a wager. Her words lingered in the air like perfume, delicate yet impossible to ignore. Alexander leaned back, his expression unreadable. For years, he'd surrounded himself with people who flattered him, feared him, or wanted something from him. Elise wanted nothing, except respect. And that made her infinitely more fascinating than anyone he had ever met. When she walked away again, he caught himself smiling. Something had shifted inside him, something small but undeniable. The arrogance that had once felt like armor now seemed childish, unnecessary. As the night wore on, Alexander found himself wishing the meal would never end. Elise, meanwhile, carried on with the same quiet strength, unaware that with every graceful word and every defiant glance, she was unraveling the walls around a man who believed he could never be changed. The night had nearly ended when the last of Alexander's guests rose from the table. They shook his hand, exchanged jokes about business and pleasure, and departed with the smug air of men who believed the world bent to their will. But Alexander didn't rise. His glass of wine sat untouched, and his gaze lingered on the empty space where Elise had been only moments ago. Something inside him refused to let the evening end without understanding who she truly was. When she finally returned, carrying the final bill and his receipt, he looked up at her and smiled faintly. You've won, mademoiselle, he said softly, his voice still laced with that rich accent. Your French was flawless, your service impeccable. I owe you $5,000. She hesitated. The room was quieter now, only a few remaining diners murmuring in distant corners. The soft violin music had faded into a slow, melancholic tune. Elise shook her head. You don't owe me anything, monsieur, she said firmly. I did my job, nothing more. Alexander leaned forward, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. You're refusing money you earned fairly. Her gaze was steady but calm. Respect can't be bought, monsieur. And neither can pride. You challenged me because you thought I couldn't rise to your level. I only wanted to show you that dignity doesn't come with a price tag. Her words struck him harder than he expected. For years, people had done anything for his approval, laughed at his jokes, entertained his arrogance, accepted his money as if it were gold falling from the heavens. But here stood a woman who not only refused his offer but dared to question his values. He looked at her again, this time not as a billionaire sizing up a waitress, but as a man seeing a woman who carried grace like armor. You surprise me, Elise, he admitted quietly. Most people see money as freedom. She smiled, though there was sadness behind it. Money is a tool, monsieur. Freedom comes from knowing who you are when no one's watching. The simple truth of it silenced him. He wanted to ask her more. About her studies, her family, her dreams, but something in her posture told him she was used to ending conversations before they got too personal. So instead, he shifted his tone. You said earlier you're studying linguistics, he said. That's rare. What draws you to words? Her eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, he saw her vulnerability. My mother used to say that words are bridges, she said. She raised me alone, and when she was too sick to work, I read to her, French, English, even a little Latin. It made her smile. I think I fell in love with the way language can heal loneliness. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He didn't know why, but her honesty cut through him in a way few things ever had. He'd built an empire, owned yachts and penthouses, yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken about something that mattered. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. And how is your mother now? Elise looked away. She's still fighting. The hospital bills are more than I can afford, but I manage. She forced a small smile, though her hands trembled slightly as she collected the plates. That's why I'm here every night. Alexander's gaze dropped to the table, guilt prickling his chest. He had come tonight seeking amusement and ego validation, but what he found instead was a mirror reflecting his own emptiness. When Elise turned to leave, he stopped her. Gently. Elise, thank you, he said quietly, his tone stripped of arrogance. For speaking to me honestly. People rarely do. She paused, looking at him with a calm expression. Then maybe that's what you needed to hear, monsieur. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Alexander staring after her. The challenge had ended, but the echo of her words lingered long after the lights dimmed. For the first time in years, Alexander Duval felt something money couldn't buy, humility. And with it came a strange ache, the kind that told him he would never forget her. A week had passed since that night at Lucille Blue, yet Elise couldn't shake the memory of Alexander Duval, the arrogant billionaire who'd tried to buy her dignity and ended up exposing his own emptiness. She hadn't seen him again, though whispers floated among the staff that he had returned the next evening, asking for her. She had been off that day, attending to her mother, and by the time she came back, he was gone. Part of her was relieved, the other part, she wasn't sure what it was. It was a gray morning when a letter arrived at her small apartment. The envelope was thick, expensive, with her name written in elegant calligraphy. Inside, a single sheet of parchment bore the emblem of the Sorbonne University. Her eyes widened as she read the words, full scholarship granted for advanced linguistic studies, fully funded by a private donor. Her hands trembled. She read it again, heart pounding. It couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Tucked at the bottom was a simple note written in a man's hand. Greater than, for the woman who reminded me that respect is not a transaction. A.D. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. He had done this quietly, without seeking praise or attention. The same man who once flaunted his wealth like a weapon had chosen to use it as kindness. She pressed the letter to her chest, her heart swelling with something she didn't want to name. Gratitude, admiration, maybe something deeper. Later that day, Elise walked through the narrow Parisian streets toward the restaurant, the autumn air crisp and sweet with the scent of roasted chestnuts and rain. She needed to thank him, to see him just once more. As she neared the familiar corner, she spotted a black car parked near the curb. The door opened, and Alexander stepped out, dressed simply this time. No entourage, no arrogance, just a man standing under the cloudy sky with a quiet smile. You got my letter, he said gently, his tone no longer the teasing drawl she remembered. I did, she replied, her voice soft but steady. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. But I wanted to. You were right that night. I thought respect could be bought, that everything had a price. You proved me wrong. Elise looked at him carefully. There was something different about him now. The sharpness in his eyes had softened, replaced by sincerity. Why me? She asked. You don't even know me. Alexander smiled faintly. Because you reminded me who I used to be, before I thought money could fix everything. You spoke to me like a person, not a billionaire. You made me remember what it feels like to earn something real. The wind swept between them, carrying the faint scent of rain. Elise lowered her gaze. I only did what anyone should, she murmured. Not everyone does, he said quietly. Most people would have taken the money and smiled. But you had courage. She looked up then, meeting his gaze. And you had a choice, to ignore what I said or to change. You chose the harder one. For a moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to still around them, the street, the distant cafe chatter, the sound of water dripping from a nearby awning. Then Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Your first month's tuition and travel expenses. You'll need it when you start your program. Elise smiled, shaking her head. You've done enough. Please, he said softly, let me do this, not as a billionaire, but as a man saying thank you. She hesitated, then accepted it. Their hands brushed, and for the briefest second, the air between them felt charged, something unspoken passing like electricity. Merci, monsieur, she whispered. Alexander smiled. No, thank you. You taught me that kindness speaks every language. They stood together as the first raindrops began to fall, two people from different worlds who had somehow met in the middle. For Elise, it was the beginning of a new chapter. For Alexander, it was redemption. And though their paths might lead them in different directions, both knew that night had changed everything, not just their fates, but their hearts.